Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Houston, and today we have Antia Boyd, who used to struggle with fear, lack of trust, and attracting emotionally unavailable men. Does that sound familiar to anybody? And was single her entire life before she finally realized it was her that needed to change. She hired a one-on-one dating coach and shortly after met her strong, kind, and stable husband, Brody. She has since been helping thousands of single women all over the world to find the right men for them, to share their life with, and to have a loving, long-term, and committed relationship quickly and without loneliness, sadness, or wasting time for over a decade now. She studied personality psychology at UC Berkeley and has been an international keynote speaker on hundreds of stages all over the world, including Harvard, Google, and many more. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Oh, I'm so excited. I know one of the things that we have talked about before is, and a lot of the audience members may connect with this, is that they may have worries and anxieties around dating, or when they're before the date, after the date, before a text, during a text, after a text, any of the communication that goes on. What might be our source for that kind of anxiety, and what can we do about that when we're showing up in dating and relationship, and how does it affect that?
Yeah, it's like that evil anxiety monster, right?
Yes.
And you know what's interesting is it just happens in our head. Nobody else feels the same way, right? So that's how we always test. Is it just me or is it everybody else? Well, is anybody else feeling that way? Probably not, right? And so, we really have to understand, because it's never about the situation that you're in that particular moment. It's literally just what is that situation triggering, right? So that's like a big piece. So for example, like if somebody doesn't call you and it triggers you to remembering, gosh, for example, when I was 10 months old, I was left alone the whole day as a baby. And so a baby doesn't have a sense of time or space. So the baby will be like, I was forgotten. You know what I mean? Like, I have no idea if anybody ever comes back. So that gets triggered in the moment when you don't get the response, right? So understanding, first of all, you're acting totally out of proportion, and you have to understand which wound is actually active right now, right? So in this particular case, what you said, anxiety, it's always about the wound of safety, right? Just groundbreaking safety, because if I don't feel safe, anxiety kicks in when we're going into survival mode, right? The spleen is kicking in, right? The fight or flight response is coming in. So it's really important to understand, okay, it's not about the text message, right? As a matter of fact, even when the text message comes, we can still be a little bit in this anxiety for a short period of time, because the system is basically, this is just a trigger, remember? Right. The system is rehearsing what happened when you were 10 months old and your mom didn't come home on time.
Yeah. And so it's kind of like a consistency, if we didn't have consistency experiences growing up, then there's a lot of energy around that safety, because consistency creates safety, right?
Yes.
When you know you can count on somebody to be there, whether it's that parent or a caregiver, whatever was your situation, I can totally see how that can spawn anxiety and fears around safety, and that it can be much more extreme for some people. No parent is perfect. And there's probably a barometer of where you manage that or have a little bit of that anxiety. But, if you're the kind of person who blows something out of proportion, spends hours toiling over it, and are totally putting all of your emotion into that text message response that's come to you, then it might be that deeper trigger, right? That's worth looking at, so you can live a freer life by unhooking from it.
Yes, absolutely. And ironically, it's so funny, right? Us actually running on anxiety almost feels safer than like facing what's really in our body, right? Or what the shame really is, right? So we rather feel guilty, we rather feel anxious than feeling shame. So shame is really like a huge conversation, right? Because who wants to feel inadequate? Who wants to feel like, well, it was not because I did something wrong, but it was, as a matter of fact, because I am wrong. I am not worthy, right? That's like a scary conversation to have, right? And one thing I always say, we rather go and feel guilt to protect ourselves from shame, because guilt is at least just us saying and thinking, I did something wrong. So as a little child, I can adjust to that, right? If I did something wrong, like no problem, right? Like I'd be like, okay, I spoke up. Okay, I'm just going to be a people pleaser. But now I'm assured that I'll survive, right? I'm assured that I'm going to get love. But of course, this ends up being completely distorted once we enter the dating and the romantic relationship life, right?
Right.
Because what ends up happening, Kate, so when I was growing up, I had an emotionally absent mother, right? Gave you already this example. She was a narcissist. And so that also meant I was not told, I love you. And I was also not given a hug or anything like that. So what ended up happening inside of me, I developed a coping mechanism. So every single woman who's listening to this, you have a coping mechanism, right? You're not running around, oh, I have all this wounding and so much pain inside of me. No, you're like, okay, no, I can't deal with this. I'm going to be Miss Independent, and I make sure nobody ever hurts me ever again. Now, the only problem with that is that you now run around with a past conflict inside of yourself. Yeah. And guess what? You attract who you're being. So are you attracting emotionally unavailable men? Right? We're going to talk about it. Why are you attracting emotionally unavailable men, and how can you stop it? You can stop it by understanding that you're not emotionally available yourself. You're not even facing what's really going on inside of yourself. You're rather saying, no, Kate, I'm going to make sure, Antia, I'm going to make sure, that I'm going to be in control, that I'm right in every conversation, because that way I know the outcome and I don't have to face uncertainty. Oh!
Yes. And it's sort of, I love that you're pointing out that the coping mechanism is to create the consistency or the certainty, that belief that we need that because we weren't getting it elsewhere. Yes. But that was the kid coping mechanism in this little baby brain that doesn't have the amazing, powerful wisdom that we have as adults.
Yes, exactly. I watched a movie the other day. It was called, I think it's called Emotion. I might be wrong, but there was this image, right? Yeah. And so it was like this beautiful butterfly coming out of the woman's heart, colorful. And by the time, because it gets so distorted, because we're actually not feeling like this right now, we're just covering up how we're really feeling. It actually arrives more like a bat, like a really distorted bird, right? Like ugly, at the man's heart, right? And the man's heart's like, I don't know, you were attractive in the beginning, but now something has shifted. Like I'm receiving resentment, like I'm receiving jealousy. I don't know what's going on, right? And then men distance themselves because they're like, I feel like there's this love, but there's also this hate. There's also this embrace, but there's also this rejection. And the brain says no, right? Because the man doesn't feel safe themselves. Yeah. Right? We all know that, right?
Yes.
Like a confused mind says no. And that's what happened to me day in, day out. I'm like, why am I attracting all those men? Why are they always making me those promises? And always wanted, never expected miracle. And then literally the next day, they would just drop me like a hot potato. Ladies, does that sound familiar, yes. Right? Like all those empty promises, right? Oh yeah, introduce you to my friends, to my parents. We're going on vacations together, whatever it is. Wouldn't that be nice to go to Mauritius or whatever, Greece or whatever it is, right? And then what you said, no text message, just ghosting, right? Yeah. And that's why, because you're like, you don't really show who you really are. You're not showing up, right? You're showing up with your coping mechanism. Yeah. When I come on a date with you and I was a mouse in the wall, I would watch your coping mechanism dating this man. I would not see the authentic Julie, the authentic Maggie, they'd sit across this man. Am I right?
Yeah. So we have the coping mechanism of being right. What are some other things that might sound familiar that women might have and use on dates and not even know it?
Oh, for sure. Perfectionism. So watching themselves, like, what kind of language am I using, right? Am I dressed right? I mean, it's kind of important to be a little bit dressed right, but you don't have to be like over the top, right? Making sure I ask him enough questions and totally forgetting, by the way, to have him ask questions as well. So we're leaving ourselves, right? Because we don't want to be with that uncomfort. So we're like, John, tell me about yourself. How are you doing? Oh, that's so interesting. Or tell me more. And then when I used to match when I'm not doing this anymore, the man would always say, well, it's so weird. She didn't share anything about herself. Like I had to talk the whole time. And it's like, yeah, because she was scared. She didn't know what to share, right? Because she was so confused inside of herself and so conflicted and insecure. She's totally insecure. The whole system is insecure, which, by the way, okay, brings me to the next thing, is understanding that when I say insecure, I'm not saying she's insecure, like not saying the woman who's listening is insecure. The system is insecure, right?
Your body systems of what the process.
Yeah, exactly, right? It comes from the five wounds. The one wound is what I said, okay, I'm not safe to be loved, right? I'm not lovable. The other one is I'm powerless. So a lot of things that show up in dating is around power, speaking up, expressing your wants and needs appropriately. So what happened with a little child with the power piece was, it's very simple. Either you were shut down, right? So when I was singing and dancing in the house, my mom would always say, oh, Antia, like, you're so annoying. And so then a little child, 3-4 years old, is like, well, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just going to suppress my voice, you know, because it doesn't want to be ostracized. Yeah. You know, it's the most painful experience. And of course, shame is being massively instilled at that particular age and stage inside of yourself, right? Yeah. And really the self-expression. So either what I see with my clients is there's no self-expression, or there's delayed self-expression. So the partners will actually say, well, why didn't you say this 2 weeks ago, last week? Why are you coming with this 5 minutes before I have to go to work? That's why, right? Because you have so much judgment around it. You have so much warning around expressing your power. Yeah. Okay, just a quick example. You know, one thing I did in Bali, I worked on an immense amount of powerlessness. Yeah. And helplessness, because I think so many women feel a lot of anger, but not a lot of women actually allow themselves to feel the sadness. Yeah. And
I like to say that that's a really good point, because so many times for our coping mechanisms, even in moments, we, like, if a man ghosts us and doesn't text us or doesn't call back ever, or you give space and then suddenly 2 weeks are by, 3 weeks, like, oh, he's really not going to call back. You know, like, even if you have the ability to wait and to not make that meaning, it's really easy to jump a well and get all upset about it, rather than really the real feeling of sadness is that I really liked him. And it would have been nice to get to know him. And just sit in that, right?
Yes.
Of, oh, I'm just fine, you know, whatever.
I'm just moving on. You know, let me just call Patrick or whatever, you know.
So you're avoiding that feeling of, and the sadness is a real feeling, and maybe that's, you know, we get scared of that sometimes, I think, to allow ourselves to feel that. But if we don't feel it in those moments, and it can be a really small moment, a few minutes, really, from realizing he's not going to call you back, versus stewing it and it just sits in there, right, and becomes part of the shame ingredients.
Absolutely. Well, I guess the women have like two things. Either the shame is lying in the sadness and the grief. That means they're not softening. Because one thing women don't know is when you cry and you haven't cried in 10 years, 20 years, it actually softens you, which is very needed to really come into your equilibrium, become aligned as a woman. And it's also important to be angry, to become assertive, to set boundaries, right? So for some women, anger and rage is that shot. It's like, ah! Right? Like they're not going there, or they would go there, and then the next second they're like, ah! And it's like, what? Curious, you know, why are you laughing? Because you were just expressing a very powerful part of yourself, and that actually had less to do with anything humorous, right? And it's because the women can't be with afterwards, right? They feel guilty. Yeah. Again, when we talked about that shame, right? It's really shame, but they're rather covered up. And I just had a client the other day, and she's like, you know, I just feel guilty after I set boundaries. I was like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. And it's actually shame, right? And that's like the biggest piece is when we talk about the shadows, is uncovering what is your shadow? What are you afraid to be called? Are you afraid to be called a bitch? Great. Your shadow is probably something around anger, around setting boundaries, around being even mean, right? Or an a-hole. You know, like I heard from a woman the other day, she's like, I was told twice I was an a-hole last week. So I told them, okay, I guess I'm an a-hole. Cool. Thanks very much, right? Because that would imagine, right? You would tell yourself like, okay, or I was afraid to be called arrogant, right? I was called at a conference. I was told I was borderline arrogant. And right away, I celebrated it. I did like a little pleasure dance. I'm like, I'm so arrogant. Yeah.
It's all of you. It's a part of all of us, and that we just get to be aware. And feedback can help us to see if we agree with being in alignment, because sometimes feedback from people opens up blind spots, right? But other times you don't have to take it in if you're like, that's really, thank you and no thank you, right? So it's really navigating that masterfully too.
Absolutely.
That's in knowing your core and knowing who you are. And I think comes to one of the other wounds that you want to mention, which I think this audience will definitely want to know about, which is the trust.
Absolutely, right? Because when we talk about, we're talking about cracking the attachment code and feeling safe to trust again. Because one thing I found in my research, quick story, when I was like, gosh, I must have been 23, 24, and this guy wasn't calling me back. Ladies, can you relate?
Yes!
Down the aisle with him. My mom will love him. He's gonna be the perfect, son-in-law, whatever. And he's not calling back, but he was like the first guy who would quote unquote everything on his list. So I thought, I hadn't even met him, by the way. By the way, you relate to that. You haven't even met him yet. But anyways.
Filling in the whole picture with shiny object syndrome, right? Yeah, totally.
Right? Like, oh my God, he's perfect. You don't know his voice and everything. Anyway, long story short. So I ended up being in this like deep despair, right? Like just like he's not calling. And you know how like every minute turns into molasses and it feels like, oh God, it feels like another 3 days and it's been just another minute. So that's what I went through. And I just went into this really dark depression for like 2 days. And then I said, okay, what needs to shift, right? Something needs to shift. I can't go through this. This is unbearable, right? And I realized it's trust. So I wrote trust a million times on pieces of paper. And I kid you not, I plastered my entire wall in my room just with the word trust. Because when we trust, right? Like if I had to tattoo one word on my body for the rest of my life, it would be trust. Because when we have trust, when we trust ourselves, when we trust the world, right? When we trust men, you got it, right? But what happens instead, if you don't trust yourself, right? Like what happens, you get to reflect it back to yourself, right? You attract untrustworthy men. And so what do we talk about how to overcome this? So the wound of not trustworthy, like I don't trust people, comes from having a parent who took advantage of you, right? Who either used you for their own entertainment. I had a narcissistic mother, so she always made sure that she got all the attention and she played with my guilt, or she just, however she needed me to be emotionally so that her inner girl is being fulfilled, right? I lost trust. So what I decided to do is like close up, right? But that's of course, and by the way, and control the heck out of my situations. Well, you better believe it. Right, ladies, do you relate to that? Like you're controlling everything. Don't you have an exit strategy on your date? Like if this doesn't work out, I have my girlfriend on speed dial, like
go to the bathroom, call me in 5 minutes, right?
All those tips and tools, right? So, but it's really about like, it's first of all starts with yourself. We're going back to the parts conflict. If you don't trust yourself, right? Why don't you trust yourself? Because number one, you're actually allowing the outside world to navigate you out of trusting yourself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You project onto men who are great for you so that you can have certainty. You're like, oh, he reminds me of John. Oh, I better don't go with that. No, he's like 5 years younger. Every time I date someone who's younger than me. Right? So we create this artificial certainty, but actually you lose trust in yourself because you unconsciously know it's artificial. You know that you don't really know. You know that it's a shadow on the wall and that you have no clue if that's true or not, right? Yeah. If he is the man that you think he is. And the other piece is, it's like really what we talked about before, is really expressing how you feel in the moment. Yeah. Like, so to just say, I was at a workshop like a couple of weeks ago and the guy's like, so how was lunch? I was like, well, honestly, I didn't appreciate that you invested so much time with this one person and I didn't really get any value out of it, right? But because I said that, and by the way, I wouldn't have done that in the past, right? But, and think about it, ladies, are you already feeling like, oh, I'm already breathing in, everything's become already restricted, what? You spoke up, and did he explode? No, he gave me what I wanted. Isn't that what a concept, right?
Yeah.
But what would that look like in your world?
And I think too, the way that in which you approached that was a direct, kind, clear answer, and it wasn't overly emotional, or you didn't have to get anger and vomit on him, right?
Oh.
It was the way in which you say it too, because men, it's the delivery too. Like if they feel that you're unstable emotionally in your ask, then there's not an interest in giving you what you want, because they don't know if that stability will go away again or how that'll be, right?
Yeah. And I think the last piece also is, Kate, is really call yourself out. You know, I remember when I was dating my husband for a couple of months, and I was like, I really wanted to manipulate him, right? And I was like, now what do? I can't manipulate him, but now I need to acknowledge it too. So I did. So I said, babe, my ego wanted to manipulate you. And we were like laughing, he's like, oh, really? How did you want to do that? Now think in the past, right? A woman would say, Antia, are you insane? He's never gonna trust you again. And by the way, my ego was saying, Antia, you're losing all the control. You're totally screwed.
Don't say this. Don't say this.
Don't give all your power away, girlfriend. What the heck are you doing? Right?
The truth is, by speaking that, you are empowered. And that is the dichotomy and true freedom. Because then when you share this with him, and he gets to bear witness to you going, this is so weird. And he says, tell me more. And you work it out and you're intimate together in weird spaces that only the two of you get to be with each other. And that's true intimacy. And intimacy is not warm and fuzzy and fluffy clouds and cotton candy. It's not all the warm and fuzzy stuff and the oxytocin dump. It's those quirky, uncomfortable, ungrounded moments of sharing and being on your edge emotionally, in the sense of risking in a way that is vulnerable and not on the edge like wild emotions.
What we really have to understand is intimacy is really like the depth of individuality. It means like, intimacy is like, imagine like you're a piece of iron and you're going into the oven. You're going to melt, girlfriend. Okay. You're going to lose your form because you're going to melt together with your man. That's what intimacy is. But when we get into that oven and it gets hot, what are we doing? We're running the opposite direction, right? We're slamming the doors. We're like, it's getting too hot. Actually, you know what? I'm too busy. I have to go on my business trip, right? My women are super successful. So working is their number one escape, right? And they're like, oh, you know what? Actually, he's too young anyway. Sorry. You know what I mean? And so we come up with those excuses because we're in this oven and now it's getting too hot. But what's ironic is next week the phone rings again, right? Like, Antia, I can't attract my man, right? I'm like, well, what happened with the other ones, right? Why did you get cold feet? And so that's what I invite you, women, to really look at. When are you checking out? When you're like, okay, this is suspect. For me, it was like, as soon as the man became vulnerable, I was like, I don't know. I think he's not it, So
it's too much. It's too this or that, right? We come up with some excuse to make it safe.
Right, exactly. Like I said, now out of the sun, we're busy again, or we need to start a new hobby. Yes, we need to start a new hobby. We have to spend our time on ourselves.
Well, I think too, like the real understanding is that I think people misunderstand is that relationships are not, they're a foundation, but they're not solid and secure in the sense of you have to get what you want security-wise from outside of you. You have to bring a grounding and a security. And relationships are fluid like the ocean. I mean, sometimes it's just a little bubble in the waves, and other times you could be in a storm, but it's never solid in that. I mean, it can be solid emotionally, but you have differing feelings and perceptions and understandings, and you'll have total conflict, but it doesn't have to be, capsize the boat.
Well, I know how to bring it back up, right? I learned sailing, so like
pop it back right up. Like, oh, we made it. That was crazy. How did we go down that path? Wow, we caught ourselves. But I mean, and it doesn't mean that you don't have a solid base and foundation. It's just, we don't want to look for security outside of ourselves as the answer, because that's where we give away our power.
Absolutely. It's so true. I mean, courage lives outside of the comfort zone, right? You can't go, Brene Brown talks about that too, right? And it's all about, it's about being vulnerable, right? When you're vulnerable, when you trust yourself, right? You're really healing, well, you're cracking your attachment code. You're never really healing your attachment code, but you're really using it, right? You're really manipulating it in your own ways that work and that allow you to be in flow and to feel respected and liked at the same time. Because the women who come and say they're either completely respected but not liked, right? There's not the approachability there, or they're over approachable, but there's no respect, right?
Yeah,
the man
they're doormat or people pleasers, and they
right.
do all these things for everybody, but I don't know why things don't work out. So absolutely. Wow, I just love this. I love that we've touched on the 5 wounds. I love that we've really touched on the ones that really affect with our attachment, and that we can crack our attachment code. I know you have a great gift to share with everybody. Would you like to share what that is?
Yeah, so I'm coming out with my new book, Magnetize The Man Method, and you're going to get 1 full chapter, girlfriend. And if you think you got some value here, I'll wait until it's massively packed with content, with exercises, with practices. Like, I'm already getting so much feedback from the women who just test reading it, how much value they're getting, and already starting implementing it. So that is going to be on magnetizetheman.com. So grab your chapter right there.
Yay! We'll have the link right below this interview. And I want to say thank you so much for coming and joining us today to share your wisdom. And everybody, you can crack the code, and you can become self-aware and fall in love with your shadow and let go of that shame and guilt and be free in love. Thank you so much.
Take care. Much love. Mwah!